Before we step into this case, understand something. Some confessions don't set you free. They drag everyone else down with you. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of real crime, subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments, do you believe a killer's final words should ever be trusted? The sirens cut through downtown Huntsville, Texas, just after midnight. Rain hammered the pavement outside the Polunsky unit, the state's death row facility. Inside a small, sterile interview room, inmate Daniel Mercer sat shackled to a steel table, hours away from his scheduled execution. He had refused his final meal, refused a chaplain, refused to see a sister. But he had requested one thing: Detective Laura Bennett. 23 years earlier, Bennett had been the young homicide detective who helped put Mercer away for the brutal murder of college student Aaron Walsh. The case had shocked the state. A promising 19-year-old found strangled in her off-campus apartment. No sign of forced entry, her neighbor Daniel Mercer's fingerprints on a wine glass beside her body. Mercer had always maintained his innocence. Until tonight. Bennett stepped into the room slowly. Mercer looked older, thinner, but his pale blue eyes were steady. "I'm ready to confess," he said calmly. "But not to what you think." Bennett didn't respond. She simply pressed record. Mercer began describing details of Aaron's apartment: the cracked window latch, the broken watch clasp under the couch, details never released to the public. Her stomach tightened. Only the killer would know those specifics. But then he said something that made her pulse spike. "I didn't kill her alone." The room felt smaller. He spoke of a second person. Someone who panicked. Someone powerful. Someone who had far more to lose than a 24-year-old warehouse worker with a minor record. Bennett's mind raced through old notes, old suspects, old interviews. One name surfaced: Assistant District Attorney Paul Renshaw, the man who had built the airtight case against Mercer and launched his own career in the process. "That's impossible," Bennett said quietly. Mercer leaned forward as far as the shackles allowed. "Check the storage unit on County Road 17, he whispered. "The one under Renshaw's brother-in-law's name." The clock outside ticked closer to dawn. And when Bennett pulled the original evidence photos from the archive that night, she noticed something she had missed for 2 decades. Aaron's broken watch wasn't stopped at the time of death. It was stopped at 11:42 p.m., the same time Paul Renshaw had sworn, under oath, he was alone in his office. But when they opened that forgotten storage unit just hours before Mercer's execution, what they found changed everything. The storage unit smelled of rust and mildew. Detective Laura Bennett stood just inside the roll-up door as a crime scene technician sliced open a yellowed evidence box tucked beneath a tarp. The unit had been rented under the name of Paul Renshaw's brother-in-law for 19 years. Paid in cash. No digital trail beyond the initial paperwork. Inside the box were old newspaper clippings about Aaron Walsh's murder, trial transcripts, photographs of Daniel Mercer entering the courthouse in shackles. And beneath those, something far worse. A slim leather journal. Bennett slipped on gloves and opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. The first entry was dated 3 days after Aaron's death. "I never meant for it to go that far." The entry described an argument. Aaron had been investigating something for the campus newspaper, a story involving misused grant funds tied to the district attorney's office. She had confronted someone she trusted, someone who had access to her apartment without forcing entry. Paul Renshaw had graduated from the same university years before. He had mentored Aaron during a summer internship at the DA's office. Bennett felt the air leave her lungs. The journal continued. She wouldn't stop pushing. She said she had copies. She said she'd go public. The next pages were fragmented, frantic. "She grabbed my watch. It broke," she screamed. "I didn't mean to." The sentence ended in a jagged line of ink. Bennett closed the journal slowly. Her mind replayed Mercer's trial, Renshaw's confident voice, his polished closing argument, the way he dismantled Mercer's alibi piece by piece. Daniel Mercer had been Aaron's neighbor. He had helped her carry groceries that evening. His fingerprints on the wine glass were easy to explain, but Renshaw had turned them into a death sentence. Back at the prison, the execution chamber was being prepared. Mercer sat alone in his cell as word of the storage unit reached the governor's office. Emergency calls lit up switchboards. Legal teams scrambled. A temporary stay was requested.
Denied.
Insufficient time to authenticate the journal. Bennett stormed into Renshaw's suburban home just before sunrise. He answered the door in a silk robe, composed but pale. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Did you ever own a leather journal?" Bennett asked. His silence lasted 1 second too long. Then he smiled. "You can't prove I wrote anything." Her phone vibrated. The governor's office had rejected the stay again. The execution would proceed as scheduled. Bennett looked at Renshaw, her pulse pounding. "If Mercer dies," she said, "and that journal is real, you didn't just frame a man. You executed him." But as officers moved to detain Renshaw for questioning, he whispered something that froze her in place. "You're still missing the most important part." And then he asked a question that made her blood run cold. "Did Mercer tell you why he waited until tonight to confess?" The execution chamber lights burned harsh and white against the sterile walls. Daniel Mercer lay strapped to the gurney, wrists secured, chest rising in slow, measured breaths. Behind the glass, witnesses sat in silence. Reporters, Aaron Walsh's family, and Detective Laura Bennett, who had forced her way into the viewing room minutes before the procedure began. Paul Renshaw's words echoed in her head. "Did Mercer tell you why he waited until tonight?" At the last second, Bennett's phone vibrated again. Forensic analysis, rushed but preliminary, confirmed the handwriting in the leather journal was consistent with samples from Renshaw's archived court notes. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough. She pushed through the chamber doors, shouting for a halt. The warden hesitated. The execution clock read 2 minutes to protocol. A call was made. Another appeal, emergency review, political pressure mounting by the second. 30 seconds before the lethal injection was scheduled to begin, the order came through. Temporary stay granted. The room exhaled as one. Mercer turned his head slightly toward Bennett. For the first time in 23 years, his expression shifted. Not relief, not triumph. Something closer to resignation. Hours later, in a secured interrogation room, Paul Renshaw finally broke. He admitted to confronting Aaron. Admitted to grabbing her wrist when she threatened exposure. Admitted the argument spiraled into fatal violence. Panic had followed. Career over. Reputation destroyed. So he had done what skilled prosecutors do best. He built a narrative. Daniel Mercer had been convenient.
Nearby.
Impressionable. Easy to paint as unstable. But when Bennett asked why Mercer had stayed silent for decades, Renshaw laughed bitterly. Because he thought he deserved it. The truth unraveled slowly. Mercer hadn't killed Aaron, but he had been in her apartment that night. He had arrived after Renshaw fled. He found her on the floor, struggling to breathe. Instead of calling police immediately, he panicked. He had a prior assault charge from a bar fight. He feared no one would believe him. By the time he called 911 anonymously, it was too late. At trial, when the evidence mounted and public outrage surged, Mercer made a decision that baffled even his own defense attorney. He stopped fighting. In a final recorded statement after the stay was granted, Mercer explained why. "I didn't kill her," he said quietly. "But I could have saved her. I let fear decide for me. Maybe this was my punishment." Charges against Mercer were formally overturned months later. Renshaw was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. But the story didn't end cleanly. Daniel Mercer walked out of prison a free man, legally exonerated. Yet he never left Huntsville. He took a small apartment, rarely spoke to reporters, and visited Aaron Walsh's grave every year on the anniversary of her death. Some say justice was finally served. Others argue the system nearly killed an innocent man. But the most unsettling truth lingers in Mercer's final confession. He didn't wait until the eve of his execution to expose Paul Renshaw because he lacked evidence. He waited because he believed, deep down, he deserved to die. If you think this case was intense, you're not ready for what comes next.